Make the mute Omega kneel. The command cracked through the royal court like winter splitting a frozen lake, and every noble in Blackthorn Kingdom turned to watch Evelyn Hart being brought before the throne. She was not dragged, not exactly. The guards only guided her by the elbows, but the meaning was the same. A silent Omega did not walk into the moon court by choice. She was displayed, judged, used as a warning to anyone born too small for the world that wanted to own them. Evelyn's white dress was old, plain, and damp at the hem from the April rain outside, its sleeves too thin for the chill that rolled through the marble hall. Around her, the great chamber glittered with silver banners, black stone pillars, and hundreds of candle flames trembling in the draught, but none of it warmed the cold pressing into her bones. At the far end of the room, 12 steps above everyone else, Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn sat on a throne carved from dark oak and wolf-shaped iron. He was dressed in black, still as a statue, his broad shoulders framed by the kingdom's crest. No one had ever accused him of mercy. His storm-gray eyes followed Evelyn with the calm focus of a predator deciding whether a creature was harmless or hiding teeth. Beside the dais stood Vanessa Crow, the woman the council wanted crowned as Luna before sunset, her pale gold gown glowing like sunlight against Evelyn's plain white. Vanessa smiled with perfect softness, the kind of smile meant for crowds and knives kept out of sight. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice sweet enough to poison tea. "The kingdom deserves to know what weakness looks like before it chooses strength." A ripple of laughter moved through the court. Evelyn kept her eyes lowered, not in surrender, but because silence had taught her where to hide her fire. She had not spoken in 12 years. Not since the old curse had closed around her voice like a chain no healer could see. The nobles called her broken. The servants called her unlucky. The council called her proof that some wolves were born without purpose. Beta Mason Reed stepped forward, his polished boots stopping inches from where Evelyn stood. "Kneel," he said. Evelyn did. Not move. The laughter faded. Somewhere high above, rain tapped against the stained glass ceiling like fingernails. Mason's jaw tightened. "Did you hear me, little Omega?" he asked, louder now, letting the whole kingdom enjoy it. "Or did silence take your ears too?" Evelyn's fingers curled against her skirt. She felt the cold bite her palms, felt every stare land on her skin, felt the old curse stir in her throat like a sleeping thorn. She could not answer him, but she could stand. So she stood. Vanessa's smile thinned. Mason reached for the ceremonial silver chain resting on a velvet cushion, the one used to test bloodlines before the throne. A few nobles leaned forward, hungry for her humiliation. Alpha King Adrian did not move, but something behind him did. Fenrir, the sacred beast of Blackthorn, lifted his enormous black head from the shadow of the throne. The wolf had ignored generals, queens, warriors, and kings. He had never bowed. He had never begged. He had never shown interest in any Omega brought before the court. But now his golden eyes opened fully, fixed on Evelyn Hart, and the entire room seemed to forget how to breathe. The sacred beast was looking at her, as if he had heard a name no one else remembered. Evelyn felt that stare before she dared to lift her eyes, and when she did, the weight of it nearly stole the breath from her chest. Fenrir's golden gaze was not wild. It was not suspicious. It was searching. For one impossible second, the entire moon court seemed to tilt around that single look, and even Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn's hand tightened against the carved arm of his throne. Vanessa noticed it too. Her smile sharpened with panic before she covered it with grace. "How charming," she said, turning toward the court as if the moment meant nothing. Even old beasts get curious when a spectacle is brought before them. A few nobles laughed, but the sound came late and thin. Mason Reed cleared his throat and lifted the ceremonial silver chain, its pale links gleaming beneath the candles. "We came here to test bloodline, not entertain superstition," he said. "An Omega who cannot speak cannot answer for herself. An Omega who cannot shift cannot serve a kingdom. And an Omega who cannot kneel must be taught where she belongs." Evelyn's throat tightened around the invisible curse. The old pain woke there, cold and precise, but she did not step back. Before Mason could move closer, a small sound broke through the hall. Not a growl, not a cry, a breathless, frightened whimper from behind the side doors. The court turned as the royal attendants hurried in, their faces pale, their hands raised carefully around a little boy in a dark velvet coat. Noah Blackthorn, heir of the kingdom, moved between them like a storm trapped in a child's body. His hair was black like his father's, his eyes bright amber, too bright, too overwhelmed by the crowded room, the candles, the whispers, the heavy pressure of so many alpha scents pressing against him. "Bring him to me," Vanessa said quickly, spreading her arms with practiced tenderness. The kingdom should see that its future Luna can calm its future king. The attendants guided Noah toward her, but the cub froze 3 feet away. His small shoulders rose. His hands clenched. The air around him trembled with panic. Vanessa's smile flickered as she crouched in her shining gown. "Come now, sweet prince," she murmured. "Do not embarrass yourself." Noah backed away. The court watched. Adrian stood so suddenly the candle flames bent. "Enough," he said, his voice low and absolute. But Mason moved faster than wisdom. "Perhaps," he said, with a cruel glance at Evelyn, "the broken Omega can be useful for one thing. Let the prince see what weakness looks like up close." The attendants hesitated, but Mason gestured sharply, and Evelyn was pushed 1 step forward. Every noble leaned in, expecting terror. Evelyn saw only the boy, not the heir, not the symbol, a child drowning in noise. She slowly lowered herself to the marble, not because Mason had ordered it, but because Noah was small and afraid, and no frightened child should have to look up at a room that wanted him perfect. She opened her empty hands and held them where he could see. No spell, no command, no demand, just patience. Noah's breathing hitched. His amber eyes locked on hers. Evelyn tilted her head, letting her own breath slow, steady, quiet as snow falling over pine. The curse burned in her throat, begging her not to make a sound, so she did not. She only stayed. 1 second passed, then another. The court waited for the prince to reject her. Instead, Noah stepped forward. Then again. Then he crossed the last space on trembling feet and folded himself against Evelyn's chest, clutching the worn sleeve of her white dress as though he had finally found shelter. A gasp swept through the kingdom. Vanessa went still. Mason's face lost its color. On the throne steps, Fenrir lowered his massive head. Evelyn's arms rose carefully around the child, gentle and protective, while Noah pressed his face into her shoulder and whispered one small word that made Alpha King Adrian forget the crown on his head. Home. For the first time that day, Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn looked uncertain. Not weak. Never weak. The court would have shattered before calling him that. But something in his storm gray eyes shifted as Noah clung to Evelyn Hart, as if the silent Omega were the only safe place in the entire kingdom. Adrian descended 1 step from the throne, then stopped, his black cloak settling around him like a shadow. Every instinct in him demanded answers. His son had refused nurses, tutors, healers, and noble women for almost a year. Noah had hidden beneath tables during council meetings, covered his ears when the bells rang, and gone rigid whenever strangers reached for him. Yet now the heir of Blackthorn Kingdom rested against Evelyn's thin shoulder, his breathing slow, his small fingers twisted in the worn fabric of her sleeve. Evelyn did not look proud. She did not look triumphant. She looked careful, as if one wrong movement might frighten the fragile peace out of the boy. Adrian noticed that first. Then he noticed the way her hand hovered above Noah's back before touching him, giving the child time to refuse. He noticed the rhythm of her breathing, steady enough for Noah to follow. He noticed the faint silver mark near her wrist, half hidden beneath the cuff of her old white dress, flickering once beneath the candlelight before disappearing. "What did you do to him?" Adrian asked. The words were quiet, but the hall bent beneath them. Evelyn lifted her gaze to his. She could not answer. The curse tightened in her throat, hot and sharp, reminding her that silence was not a choice the world had kindly given her. It was a lock. She only shook her head once. Vanessa stepped forward at once, sensing a chance to reclaim the room. "Your Majesty, she should be removed from the prince immediately. Whatever this is, it is not natural." Noah stirred at her voice and pressed closer to Evelyn, a low, frightened sound rising in his chest. Evelyn turned slightly, shielding him from the crowd with her own small frame. The movement was simple, instinctive. It was also the first time anyone in the court had seen an Omega place herself between the royal heir and 100 judging eyes. Adrian saw it too, and his jaw tightened. "No one touches my son," he said. The guards froze. Mason Reed looked offended, but he bowed his head. Vanessa's painted calm cracked for the length of a breath. Evelyn lowered her eyes back to Noah, smoothing one hand down his back in slow, even strokes. The boy's breathing softened again. His claws, which had been faintly visible at the tips of his fingers, withdrew. His shoulders loosened. And then, to the disbelief of every noble watching, Noah fell asleep in her arms. The moon court went silent. Not the polite silence of ceremony. Not the fearful silence of royal command. This was the deep, stunned silence of people witnessing something they had already decided was impossible. Adrian came down the remaining steps. He stopped close enough that Evelyn could smell rain, cedar, and the cold edge of winter on him. His presence pressed against the air, powerful and controlled, but she did not shrink. She simply held his sleeping son and waited. He has not slept through a court gathering since his mother died, Adrian said, so quietly that only the front rows could hear. Evelyn's expression softened, not with pity, but with understanding. That softness struck him harder than any answer could have. She adjusted Noah's coat around his shoulders, tucking the velvet carefully beneath his chin so the draft from the stained glass ceiling would not chill him. A tiny gesture, a motherly gesture, one Vanessa had never thought to make. Behind Adrian, Fenrir rose. The sacred beast moved down from the dais with a sound like thunder wrapped in fur. Nobles stepped away so quickly their silk sleeves brushed the pillars. Evelyn did not move because Noah was sleeping, and she would not wake him to save herself from fear. Fenrir stopped before her. His massive black head lowered until his golden eyes were level with hers. Adrian inhaled sharply. The beast had never approached and accused Omega without command. Fenrir sniffed the air once, then gave a deep, almost reverent rumble. Evelyn's fingers tightened around Noah, but her gaze stayed calm. The wolf leaned forward and placed his enormous muzzle against the hem of her white dress, resting there like a guardian at the feet of someone long awaited. No one laughed this time. No one breathed. And Alpha King Adrian Blackthorne realized the question was no longer what Evelyn had done to his son. The question was why the two most guarded souls in his kingdom had chosen her before he had. Vanessa Crowe recovered before the rest of the court did, because fear made her graceful. She stepped into the open space before the throne with her hands folded at her waist, and her smile returned, softer than silk and colder than the rain sliding down the stained glass above. "Your Majesty," she said, careful enough to sound wounded instead of furious. "We are all relieved that Prince Noah is calm. But that is exactly why this cannot be ignored." Evelyn sat on the marble with the sleeping heir held carefully against her shoulder, one arm supporting his back, the other shielding his face from the candlelight. She did not look at Vanessa. She watched the child breathe. Slow in, slow out, safe. For that small rhythm, she would have let the entire kingdom misunderstand her. Vanessa turned to the nobles. A royal heir does not attach himself to an unknown Omega without cause. A sacred beast does not kneel without influence. We all saw it. Something passed through this room. A whisper stirred among the council seats. Fear was easier for them to believe than kindness. Mason Reed seized it at once. "Forbidden bloodline magic," he declared, pointing toward Evelyn as if naming her made the accusation true. She entered this court silent, untested, and unclaimed. Within minutes, the prince was in her arms and the sacred beast was at her feet. That is not innocence. That is manipulation. Fenrir's lips lifted in a silent warning, but Evelyn lowered her hand just slightly toward the beast, not touching him, only asking for stillness. To the shock of the front row, Fenrir obeyed. Adrian saw it, and his expression darkened with questions he could not ask in front of a kingdom hungry for punishment. He looked from his sleeping son to Evelyn's pale face, then to the council. "The boy is calm," he said. "That is not a crime. It is when no one can explain it," Vanessa replied, her voice trembling with rehearsed concern. "Your Majesty, if she has placed any unknown mark upon him, we cannot risk the future of Blackthorne." The oldest councilman rose, leaning on his silver-headed cane. "Royal law is clear. Any unregistered Omega who touches the heir through unexplained power must be bound and tested before the throne." The words landed like ice. Adrian's jaw flexed. The law was older than his reign, older than his grief, written after wars that had nearly ended the royal bloodline. If he dismissed it now, Every enemy in the kingdom would call him compromised. Vanessa knew that. Mason knew that. Evelyn understood only one thing. Noah had finally fallen asleep. If she fought, he would wake surrounded by fear again. So when Mason brought the ceremonial silver chain forward, she did not pull away. She adjusted Noah gently, easing him into the arms of a stunned royal attendant who looked at her as if she had handed him something sacred. Noah stirred once, reaching for her sleeve. Evelyn pressed 2 fingers softly to her own heart, then to his tiny hand, a silent promise. I am still here. The child settled. Only then did she stand. The marble was cold beneath her thin shoes. The court watched with bright, unforgiving eyes. Mason circled behind her, lifting the chain with satisfaction. Let the kingdom see what hides beneath all that silence, he said. Vanessa's smile gleamed. Adrian took 1 step forward, then stopped as the councilman turned toward him, waiting to see whether the king would break his own law for a voiceless Omega he did not yet understand. Evelyn raised her wrists. They were trembling, but she did not hide them. Mason laid the first silver link against her skin. The court expected smoke, pain, proof of guilt, or proof of weakness. Instead, the chain shivered. A thin white glow ran through the metal. Mason frowned and tightened his grip. The silver softened like wax near a candle flame, bending around Evelyn's wrist without burning her, then slipping apart link by link until it fell in harmless pieces at her feet. The room went utterly still. Vanessa took 1 step back. Fenrir lowered his head again, and on the throne steps, Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn stared at the broken chain as if the law itself had just bowed to her. The fallen silver links lay scattered across the marble like pieces of a lie no one knew how to explain. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Even the candle flames seemed to hold still. Evelyn stared down at the broken chain, feeling the old curse tighten in her throat as if it had sensed the room, turning toward a truth it had spent years keeping buried. Mason Reed was the first to speak, but his voice no longer carried its polished confidence. That proves nothing, he said, though his eyes kept flicking to the melted silver at her feet. Old metal fails. That is all. No one believed him. Not fully. Not after seeing royal silver bend around an Omega's wrists like it had recognized her. Vanessa moved beside him, her face pale beneath the careful powder, but her smile remained pinned in place. Perhaps the test was flawed, she said. Perhaps someone prepared the chain. Her gaze slid to Evelyn. Or perhaps she is exactly what we feared. The word fear spread through the court without being spoken. Evelyn could feel it in the way nobles leaned away from her, in the way councilmen whispered behind jeweled hands, in the way the guards gripped their spears tighter even though she had done nothing but stand there with empty palms. Alpha King Adrian did not look away from her. That was worse somehow. His stare was not cruel. It was searching, relentless, as if he had begun reading a language on her skin that even she had never learned to understand. There is another test, Mason said suddenly, and Evelyn's blood went cold. Vanessa turned her head sharply, warning him with her eyes, but Mason was already too desperate to stop. She was not born mute. The words struck the court harder than the broken chain. A ripple of shock moved through the nobles. Evelyn's hand rose to her throat before she could stop it. Adrian saw. His eyes darkened. Mason smiled then, seeing he had found a wound. Oh yes, the silent little Omega was not always silent. When she was 8 years old, servants in the lower villages claimed she could hum and make stray wolves gather at the edge of the forest. They said her voice made sick pups sleep and frightened beasts follow. Then her family was accused of treason, and after that, not a sound from her. Strange, is it not? Evelyn's pulse became a hard drum in her ears. The memory came back in flashes she never invited. Her mother's white hands covering her mouth, her father telling her to hide, a moonlit room, a cold vow whispered over her tongue, and the sudden emptiness where her voice had been. She had been a child. The kingdom had called her dangerous before she even understood what danger meant. Vanessa lifted her chin. If she has nothing to hide, let her speak now. Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice into something almost gentle, which made it worse. Come on, little Omega. Call your imaginary wolves. The court waited. Evelyn opened her mouth. Pain bloomed instantly, bright and silent, wrapping around her throat like ice threaded with thorns. No sound came out. A few nobles laughed, relieved to have something familiar to cling to. Weakness. Failure. A broken girl standing before a perfect throne. But Evelyn was not looking at them anymore. Her eyes had moved past Mason, past Vanessa, past even the Alpha King, to the statue of the moon goddess standing behind the throne. The statue's face had been turned away from the kingdom for 20 years, carved in pale stone, cold and unreachable. Evelyn lowered her hand from her throat. Her fingers brushed the place where the silver chain had left a faint line across her skin. One small drop of blood, no bigger than a tear, slipped from her wrist and touched the first step of the dais. The sound was tiny. The reaction was not. A silver light pulsed beneath the marble. The court gasped as a hairline crack opened across the base of the moon goddess statue, glowing from within like dawn trapped inside stone. Fenrir rose to his full height. Noah woke in the attendant's arms and reached toward Evelyn. And for the first time since Adrian Blackthorne had taken the throne, the ancient statue slowly turned its face back toward the court. No one saw Vanessa move except Fenrir. The sacred beast's ears flattened a heartbeat before the court's awe turned into confusion. But by then Vanessa had already reached for the small crystal charm at her wrist, pressing her thumb against the hidden moonstone beneath her sleeve. It was such a tiny motion that it looked like nervousness. A future Luna trembling before a miracle. But Evelyn felt the change immediately. The air shifted, sharp and bitter, like frost spreading over warm glass. Noah, still reaching toward her from the attendant's arms, suddenly went limp. The attendant cried out and nearly dropped him, but Adrian crossed the distance in less than a second and caught his son against his chest. The whole court erupted. Nobles rose from their seats. Guards turned in every direction. Councilmen shouted over one another. Evelyn stood frozen on the first step of the dais. Her gaze locked on Noah's face as the color drained from his lips and his tiny hands stopped grasping for her. Adrian's calm shattered. "Healers," he commanded, and the word rolled through the hall with enough force to make the windows tremble. 3 royal healers rushed forward, robes sweeping over the marble, silver cases opening in their hands. They checked the child, whispered old remedies, pressed glowing palms near his chest, and one by one, their faces changed. Not into fear for themselves, into the kind of fear that comes when skill meets a locked door. "Your Majesty," the eldest healer said, voice shaking, his pulses fading. "Something is blocking us." Vanessa covered her mouth with both hands. She touched him. She whispered, just loudly enough. The Omega touched him first. Mason seized the accusation. "Arrest her." She did this. Fenrir's growl rolled through the hall, low and warning, but Evelyn did not hear Mason anymore. She heard only the thin, uneven sound of Noah trying to breathe. The curse in her throat pulsed like a living chain. It knew what she was thinking. It knew she remembered the lullaby her mother had once sung under a locked bedroom door, the melody older than the kingdom, the song that called lost wolves home. Speaking would hurt. Singing could break whatever remained of her voice forever. But Noah was not a symbol, not a prince, not a piece in a royal game. He was a child who had called her home. Evelyn stepped toward him. Adrian turned, his eyes burning with command and desperation. "Can you help him?" he asked. The court fell silent around the impossible question. A king asking a silent Omega for a miracle. Evelyn could not promise him anything. She only held out her arms. For one terrible second, Adrian hesitated. The law, the council, the throne, Vanessa's accusation, all of it stood between them. Then Noah's breath caught, and the king placed his son into Evelyn's hands. She sank to her knees, cradling him against her chest, and pressed her forehead gently to his. The curse closed around her throat at once. Pain flashed white behind her eyes, but she opened her mouth anyway. At first there was nothing. Mason laughed once, a small ugly sound. Then Evelyn exhaled, and a note slipped free. Soft, broken, barely louder than rain on glass. Yet the moment it touched the air, the moon goddess statue blazed with silver light. The healers stumbled back. Adrian went utterly still. Evelyn sang the next note, and Noah's chest rose. She sang again, trembling, tears bright in her eyes, but never falling, and the bitter frost in the air cracked apart like thin ice. Outside the palace, beyond the black gates and the long road through the pines, a wolf answered. Then another, then dozens, then hundreds. Their howls rolled toward Blackthorne, like thunder beneath the earth. Noah drew in a full breath and curled his tiny hand around Evelyn's finger. The court stared at her as if the silent girl had just opened the sky. Vanessa stepped backward, her perfect face emptying of color, while Fenrir lowered himself beside Evelyn and the child. And far beyond the stained glass windows, the kingdom gates began to shake. The first gate opened without a hand touching it. The sound rolled through Blackthorn Palace like a giant waking beneath the stone, deep, ancient, impossible to ignore. Every guard turned toward the arched windows as the second gate groaned open, then the third, then the fourth, until the entire royal compound stood exposed to the rain-dark forest beyond. No alarm bell rang. No sentry gave the order. The gates simply obeyed something older than command. Evelyn remained on her knees beside the dais, Noah breathing softly against her chest, his small fingers still curled around hers. Her throat burned from the song, every breath rough and fragile, but the melody lingered in the air like silver mist. Adrian stood a few feet away, torn between the child she had saved and the kingdom moving outside his control. Then the wolves came. Not soldiers, not rogues, not invaders. Wolves. Hundreds of them emerged from the black pine forest, their coats silver, white, gray, brown, and midnight black, all shining with rain. Their paws crossed the palace grounds in perfect silence. They did not snarl. They did not charge. They moved like a tide answering the moon. The nobles pressed back from the windows. Some covered their mouths. Some whispered prayers they had not spoken since childhood. Mason Reed backed into a pillar, his face pale as old paper. Vanessa stood completely still, her hand frozen near the charm at her wrist, as if any movement might expose her fear. The great doors of the moon court swung inward. Cold rain-scented air poured through the hall, carrying pine, wet earth, and the wild, clean breath of the forest. The first wolf stepped across the threshold. It was an enormous white female with a silver stripe down her chest. Behind her came another, then 10, then more than Evelyn could count. They passed the guards without touching them. They walked between the noble benches, around the council seats, across the marble floor where Evelyn had been ordered to kneel in shame. Not one wolf looked at the throne. Not one bowed to the council. They came straight to her. Evelyn held Noah closer, not from fear, but from instinct, as the wolves formed a wide circle around them. Their golden eyes lowered. One by one they sat. The court watched in stunned silence as the creatures of the old forest surrounded the silent Omega and the royal heir like living walls of fur and breath. Adrian's gaze dropped to Evelyn's wrist. Where Noah's fingers touched her skin, a mark had appeared, faint but unmistakable. A crescent moon wrapped around a wolf's crown, glowing beneath the surface like starlight under ice. His breath caught. He knew that mark. Every king of Blackthorn knew it from forbidden tapestries locked beneath the palace, from legends the council dismissed as dead history. It was the mark of the first Luna bloodline, the women said to guide royal wolves without force, to heal lost heirs, to call sacred packs home. Adrian looked at Evelyn as if seeing her for the first time and realizing the kingdom had spent 12 years calling a crown a chain. "That is not forbidden magic," he said, his voice low, carrying through the entire hall. "That is royal Luna blood." Vanessa made a small sound, almost a denial, but Fenrir drowned it out. The sacred beast rose beside the throne, larger than every wolf in the court, his black fur glinting under the candlelight. He walked past Adrian, past the council, past Vanessa, who stepped away as though the floor beneath her had turned thin. Fenrir stopped in front of Evelyn. She looked up at him, exhausted, trembling, still holding Noah like the only truth in the room. Slowly, with the whole kingdom watching, the Alpha King's sacred beast bent one massive foreleg, lowered his head to the marble, and knelt before her. For one impossible breath, the moon court belonged to Evelyn Hart. Not to the council, not to the nobles, not even to the throne. The sacred beast knelt before her. The royal wolves formed a living circle around her, and the little prince slept safely against her heart as if the entire kingdom had not spent the day trying to prove she was nothing. Evelyn did not understand why the crescent mark glowed on her wrist. She did not understand why the moon goddess statue watched her now with stone eyes full of silver light. She only knew that Noah was breathing, Fenrir was calm, and Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn was looking at her as though every law he had trusted had been written by people afraid of the truth. Vanessa understood it too, and that was what broke her. Her perfect court smile vanished. The future Luna the council had polished for years looked suddenly small beneath the watching wolves. "No," she whispered. "No, this is a trick. She is an Omega from a ruined family. She cannot be royal blood." Adrian did not turn away from Evelyn. "The wolves disagree." Those 3 words fell harder than any accusation. A murmur swept through the nobles, and Vanessa's hand flew to the moonstone charm at her wrist. The crystal flashed with a cold violet glow. Fenrir rose at once, but Evelyn moved first, not toward Vanessa, not toward danger, but around Noah. She curved her body over the sleeping child with pure instinct, shielding him from the sudden burst of bitter light that streaked across the marble. It struck the moon's sigil at the center of the court and shattered into harmless sparks, but the force of it awakened the room. The wolves surged to their feet. Guards lifted their spears. Nobles cried out and stumbled back against the benches. Adrian's voice cut through the panic, low and terrible. "Vanessa." The charm slipped from Vanessa's fingers, clattering against the floor. For the first time, every eye saw the dark thread of magic coiled inside it, twisting like smoke trapped under glass. The oldest healer gasped. "That is a binding charm." Mason Reed turned toward the side doors, searching for escape, but the white wolf with the silver stripes stepped into his path and simply stared him still. Vanessa backed away, shaking her head. "I protected the kingdom," she said. "Her bloodline should have died with her parents." Evelyn's breath stopped. The words opened a door inside. Her memory. Her mother singing in a dark room. Her father hiding a silver pendant beneath Evelyn's collar. A warning whispered through tears. "Never let them hear your real voice until the wolves come for you." The mark on Evelyn's wrist flared. The moon's sigil beneath her knees answered. Silver light rose around her, not hot, not painful, but warm as dawn after a winter night. Noah stirred and reached for her face. Fenrir bowed his head again. The royal wolves lowered themselves one by one, and the glow gathered behind Evelyn like the outline of another form waking inside her. A white wolf, tall and luminous, with fur like moonlit snow and golden eyes bright enough to silence the court. Evelyn remained human, trembling and breathless, but everyone saw the spirit of her true wolf standing with her. The nobles who had laughed pressed their hands to their hearts. The guards forgot their orders. The council could not speak. Adrian stepped down from the throne, crossed the marble, and stopped before the radiant shadow of the white Luna. Then the Alpha King, who had never bowed to any living soul, lowered himself to one knee before Evelyn Hart. Adrian's knee touched the marble, and the sound was softer than a whisper, yet it changed the kingdom more than any command he had ever given. The court stared at their king kneeling before the girl they had mocked, and one by one, understanding spread through the hall like dawn crossing frozen ground. Evelyn Hart stood trembling in the silver light. Noah safe in her arms, her white dress torn at the hem, her voice rough from the song that had saved him, and still she looked less like a defeated Omega than every crowned portrait behind the throne. The spirit of the white Luna remained behind her, luminous and calm, its golden eyes fixed on the court with a patience that felt ancient. Adrian lifted his gaze to Evelyn, not with suspicion now, not with the cold distance of a ruler, but with the stunned reverence of a man finally seeing what his kingdom had nearly destroyed. "Who taught you?" he asked, his voice low enough to make the nearest nobles bow their heads. That silence meant weakness? Evelyn's throat burned too deeply for an answer, but the tears in her eyes were not from fear. Noah stirred against her chest, looked at his father, then pressed his cheek back against Evelyn's shoulder as if the matter had already been decided. The royal healers moved quickly around Vanessa's fallen charm, their hands glowing over the dark thread inside the crystal. The eldest healer's face tightened with shame. "This charm held a voice-binding curse," he said. "Old magic. Deliberate. It was tied to Miss Hart's bloodline, and the same pattern touched the prince tonight." A shocked sound broke from the council benches. Mason Reed tried to speak, but Fenrir turned his head toward him, and Mason's words vanished before they formed. Vanessa's polished mask finally fell apart. "She was never supposed to be found," she said, barely louder than the rain outside. "Her family would have taken everything." Adrian rose slowly. The court rose with him only halfway, uncertain whether they were allowed to stand before the truth. His eyes stayed on Vanessa and Mason. No, he said. They would have restored what this kingdom forgot. He gave one quiet order, and the guards stepped forward, not with cruelty, but with finality. Vanessa and Mason were escorted from the moon court beneath the silent judgment of the wolves. No one laughed now. No one whispered broken. The nobles who had leaned forward to watch Evelyn kneel lowered themselves instead, first one row, then another, until the marble hall filled with the rustle of silk and the soft sound of knees touching stone. The council bowed. The guards bowed. Beyond the open doors, the wolves lowered their heads beneath the rain. Fenrir came to Evelyn's side and stood there like a living vow. Adrian removed the black royal cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around her, careful not to wake Noah, careful not to touch her without permission. Warmth settled over her shaking frame. Evelyn Hart, he said, and her name carried through the entire kingdom. You were never broken. You were hidden. You were never voiceless. You were silenced. And before this throne, before the moon goddess, before every wolf who answered you, I recognize you as the last daughter of the Luna bloodline, the chosen guardian of my heir, and the fated mate my wolf knew before I did. Evelyn looked at him then, truly looked, and the curse around her throat loosened like ice surrendering to spring. A single word rose from her, fragile but clear. Home. Noah smiled in his sleep. The white Luna behind her lifted its head, and the silver light swept through the court, washing over every face that had once judged her. Blackthorn Kingdom did not cheer. It could not. The shock was too deep, the shame too fresh, the miracle too bright. It simply bowed while the silent Omega stood beside the Alpha King, no longer